This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it, and that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders. Today, I'm honored to have Carrie Rickert on the show. She is an author and the founder and CEO at Nomis Advisors, which is a management and life coach consultancy in Maryland. And she's also the author of a book, which we're going to talk about, called Trauma is a Catalyst. Anyway, with all that being said, Carrie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Sean. It's so great to be here today.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background, why you got into consultancy and life coaching and things like that, and what is it that you do today?
Sure. Okay, yeah, absolutely. So, interestingly enough, my undergraduate degree is in clinical psychology. My master's degree is in forensics. I worked for Baltimore County Police Department in Maryland for a little while doing forensics, and I found that did not work out so well with, work-life balance. I worked midnight shifts. My fiance at the time worked normal hours, and so we never saw each other. So soon after we got married, I ended up leaving forensics and moving into the corporate world. And in that first foray of moving into the corporate world, I realized what I didn't want to do. How I didn't want to either be treated or treat others who were working with me and for me. And from there, I had my first child, stayed home with him for a little while. And as I was trying to figure out what else to do, I had made some pretty good connections in Baltimore and became the executive director of Sales and Marketing Executives International for the Maryland chapter. And through that, I made enormous connections. And that is actually what got me started in management consulting. So I met somebody who knew somebody who needed somebody in consulting. And so I started out working part-time for them, and it just turned into I kept going. And I'm like, you might as well just hire me full-time now because this is what I'm doing. And during that time, my primary focus was on organizational assessments. So I would do really in-depth assessments for companies, and so not just the technical aspects of what they were doing, but the people aspects. So what I focused on mostly was how are we maintaining our business in such a way that we are treating people well and creating loyalty, and those people in turn refer other people into the business, and we become best places to work, right? And I loved that work. And I did that for several years until I was in a terrible car accident. So I was actually traveling to a work event when I got into my accident. I hydroplaned into the back of a tractor trailer, and as a result, ended up with a traumatic brain injury and a bunch of other things that also happened. And so I was at University of Maryland shock trauma for about a month, and then spent a couple of weeks in rehab. And then when I got out of that, I once I got out of the hospital, I was kind of like, okay, so when can I go back to work? Like, because work was my comfort zone, right? Like I always knew I was good at work. You know, it- parenting, it's hit or miss, right? Like parenting is really hard, but I always knew I was good at work. Um, so I tried really hard to get back to work and I did. And after 2 weeks of being there, I realized that I could not do things in the same way that I had previous to my accident. My thought was recovery meant being exactly the same as I was before, you know, being able to do things in the exact same way. And that is not how that worked out for me. So, the picture in my head had to be adjusted. And so I ended up starting my own consultancy firm, No Miss Advisors. And through contacts that I had made over the years, I ended up with a couple of clients. Then I started working with the Edward Lowe Foundation, and the foundation does work with economic development organizations all over the country. And I run one of their programs called Systems for Integrated Growth. So in that program, I do needs assessment or organizational assessments for companies, then figure out who on my team is best suited to meet their needs. And, we set a scope of work and proceed from there. So it's a smaller scale than what I did before with the large in-depth org assessments, but it still has very meaningful impact, particularly for scaling businesses that haven't quite gotten to the place where they can afford to hire consultants. They're still looking for some help to give them a little bit of an edge. And we provide some education and best practices so that they can have that edge and get to the place where they can then really scale and start hiring the resources that they need.
Yeah. And going back to the accident, if my memory serves me correctly, there were a lot of like setbacks along the way. Like even from the very beginning, with weather being a factor of getting you to the hospital quickly and the things like that. How have you seen those challenges along the way kind of serve as a catalyst forward for changing your perspective on things?
Sure, absolutely. So, as I said before, the accident, I thought that once I left the hospital, that everything was going to just go back to normal. And just previous to my accident, I had separated from my husband at the time. And so my kids, who were 4 and 8, then we had just moved into a new place. We were adjusting to life schedules, and they were with me 60% of the time and their dad 40% of the time. And we had a new place to live and all of these things, right, that we were already sort of struggling with. And then I ended up in the accident. And so then I was just gone from my kids' lives, basically from the everyday for 6 weeks. So when I got home from the hospital, I just wanted to be able to fully be in my kids' lives. And also, I wanted to go back to work. I wanted to be a valuable member of my family. And instead, what happened was for 2.5 months, my parents had to move in with me and the kids, which is wonderful and also a little crowded. My parents stopped their lives for me and to help me through my accident and my recovery. And for that, I am incredibly grateful. And also, I was trying so hard to be the independent, self-sufficient person that I was before.
Mm-hmm.
And what I had to do instead was learn how to do things a different way. So as far as perspective shift goes, I had to learn how to recognize when I needed help and actually ask for it. And not, and I still have trouble with this because I have to really continuously remind myself that asking for help does not mean I'm failing. It means that I am utilizing the resources that I have around me to be able to do the best job that I can do. Physically, I had a lot of challenges from the accident. Brain injury survivors a lot of times end up with having brain fatigue. So, like when you're tired at the end of the day, it's like you're physically tired, and sometimes you're a little bit mentally tired. But brain fatigue after traumatic brain injury is like all encompassing. It is like you're just jelly and you can't do anything else except rest. And I have never been somebody who is very good at resting. I've always been incredibly fast paced. I've always enjoyed being fast paced. I like the people around me to be fast paced. And I have had to learn how to slow down and listen to my body. And that has really impacted, and I think in a positive way, how I then approach the companies that I work with and the individuals that I work with, because it has allowed me to have significantly more compassion. We like to think that work and life there's like that separation of church and state. There's that separation of work and life. And reality is that's not true. That's just made up stuff that, we're like, when you're at work, and you can only focus on work things. And that's not true. Your life leaks into everything, and your work leaks into your life when you get back home. If you've had a bad day at work, chances are when you get home, you may be a little grumpy at the kids, right?
Yeah.
When you've had a fight trying to get your kid out the door and to daycare or to school, when you get to work, you might be a little bit frazzled and not like on it all the time. And so my accident really allowed me to have more compassion for other people and more curiosity. And I have realized that asking questions and making sure that people feel heard in whatever their distress is actually makes them better employees. Pretending that life isn't going on around you, or, that life outside of work isn't happening is not really realistic. But when you talk to people and say, like I've had clients who have had some pretty major things happen right in the middle of an engagement. And I'll say, okay, it seems like this is not a great time to talk about work stuff. So why don't you tell me what's going on? Like what happened? Is there anything I can do to help you with? Or, and I will stop what we're doing and just listen.
Yeah.
And I found that compassion helps me build those relationships in a quicker period of time, right? Because I am curious and interested in not just how they got to where they are in their work life, but how they got to where they are in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's great. And, and I can really understand what you're saying as far as slowing down and being a fast-paced person. About 2 years ago, well, I guess I've torn my ACL twice in the last couple of years. And
wow.
Doing martial arts. And before that, I was always a very fast walker. I got so annoyed when people were slow at walking down the hallways in the office or something like that. I'm like, oh, if I'm behind a slow walker, but being injured, I had to slow down. I was on, my knee injury the first time was pretty bad, and I was on crutches
non-weight bearing for 6 weeks before going through physical therapy, then on a cane for another 6 weeks. And it was just, it forced me to slow down.
It's
So then I
hard.
started, then I learned to empathize with the other slow walkers and realizing like there may be a reason for this. and
Right.
and it started to make me empathize better with people, not just in that circumstance, but also with other things like you're talking about, like, what was their day like before they got to work? If you're going to have a one-on-one, think about what the commute is for that person. Maybe you have an employee that has a 45-minute commute through heavy traffic every day. Well, I know when I'm in heavy traffic, I get pretty grumpy. So maybe they're going to come in grumpy. Maybe I should move this one-on-one to after lunch or something like that.
Right. Yeah. And being willing to really hear people and understand, even if the answer is still what the answer was, right? So like say somebody is asking for some kind of special accommodation and the answer is still going to be no. You can still respond with curiosity and compassion and say, tell me why this is important to you. And let's see if we can figure out something that, figure out how we can do something to help you. And I find that when people feel heard,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not they get their way, they still feel like they are being taken care of and they are cared about, and therefore put in a little more effort to what they're doing every day for you. If leaders were more compassionate and curious about things rather than just assuming that they know the answer, they would get a lot more out of their teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said there with curiosity. And I think being humble and curious goes a long way. And admitting that you don't know what you're doing, admitting when there's a new challenge. And I know for me, the higher up that I go in an organization, the less I know about what goes down, at the, individual contributor level. And you have to ask for their advice and their opinions because no one's going to know better about what's going on at that level than they are. And having the ability to step back and saying, at my level, I can see strategy further out, but I can't see what's right in front of us, what you guys are working on. And that's where I need the help and I need the advice.
Right. And as you get further up in an organization, you have big picture view. You don't have the everyday detail view. And the everyday detail view is sometimes really crazy. And once you realize that, it's like, oh, so when I asked you to write these 6 other emails, that was actually too much for you to handle within one day. I understand that now based on understanding what you are doing in the day-to-day and how that is impacting you. And sometimes it's outside of work stuff that is impacting people, right? For me, when I got back to work, I had also just learned that I had lost the hearing in my left ear from the accident. And so like I was trying to navigate that. I was trying to navigate the brain fatigue. I was trying to be the exact same that I was before. And I'm like, I'm just failing at everything. And I finally was like, nope, I can't do this. I've got to find a new way. And sometimes that is the answer, right? Like sometimes it isn't stay and keep going and making yourself miserable. Sometimes it is, let me talk to my leader or let me talk to my employee and figure out how can we do this differently? And if the answer is we can't, then it becomes a mutual decision to part ways instead of like animosity and burning bridges, right? Like I always feel like if you can leave a job and know that at least half the people that you have worked with would give you a recommendation, then you're doing something right.
Yeah.
But that can only happen if you can be real around people and, share what's going on. And and not only share your own stuff, but be willing to listen to others.
Yeah, absolutely. And one question that I have for you is when it comes to learning those lessons of being real and listening to people, how much of that came from the result of the trauma? Like, because your title of your book is "Trauma is a Catalyst," so obviously it's done something. It's led in a direction to move ahead and move forward and not hold you back. How much of that kind of came from that, and how did that manifest itself?
So I would say that the accident, and it's interesting because my coworker and I that were both in the accident together. She and I are still very good friends. We celebrate our anniversary of not dying every year, and you know, we have remained friends, and we always say that even though every last bit of like being in the hospital and recovering and the pain and the exhaustion and everything else was so terrible. I mean, it sucked. There's no two ways about that. That sucked. And neither one of us would have given it back. Because it really did shift that perspective. I became less of I'm going to work and get everything done because this is what I'm supposed to do to be a valuable member of my team, to really shifting that mindset and saying, okay, so how can we look at this differently? And rather than just do the things because this is what we are supposed to do, is this the right way? Like, are we asking ourselves these questions, or are we just doing things because this is the status quo? And, I've always been a rule follower. So the accident really has allowed me to realize that rules can be really beneficial, and also rules can be stagnating. They can really hamper your innovation. They can hamper your ability to connect with other people. And reality is, if you don't connect with other people on your team and your leaders and the people you are leading, if you're not connecting with those people, you're not getting anything done.
Yeah.
At least nothing meaningful. And so, I think the trauma being a catalyst for me, it was a catalyst for me personally in the sometimes it's important to slow down and really figure out what the priorities are and focus my time and energy on that, because I don't have the energy always to focus on all the things. And I had always been a focus on all the things kind of person. And then I think more globally, the catalyst is, how do we connect with our people even better? How do we show that compassion and that care and try to understand people even when we disagree?
I think that's really good. And I feel like I parallel you somewhat with my knee injury, just by learning to focus on the things that are important, because, I was regularly doing martial arts classes, playing sports with my children and doing all these things. And then after the second ACL tear, the doctor's like, look, you need to choose what you do. Like, you can't go run marathons anymore. You need to decide, like, if going out in the yard and throwing football with a child is the most important thing, then do that and quit the running. And quit the
Right.
sparring people and things like that. And, having to make those decisions and realize what is the most important and focus on that to, kind of protect myself long term has become, an important thing. But also understanding where to connect with people. And, when you go through an injury, and, of any sort, you're going to have to ask for help. And,
Right.
for me, being on crutches for 6 weeks and then on a cane for 6 weeks, you may see me here, holding a coffee cup. I drink a lot of coffee, but it's really hard to carry a cup of coffee while you're on crutches. And
Oh yeah, for sure.
how much I would hate to have to ask somebody, can you please hold my coffee for me? And
Right.
but having the
Even just to open the door,
exact,
right?
yeah, it's just
It's painful to ask for help, especially when, I mean, and I hate to say it, but our country values bootstrapping, independence, like doing it yourself, or at least the illusion of that, right? Because that's really what it is. It's an illusion. Nobody can do it by themselves. None of it. We all need people. We all need resources. We all need to connect with other people. And sometimes that connection is asking for help. During my accident, I had this wonderful friend, and she would just offer to do things all the time. And she was always so great about like, oh, let me drive you to such and such, or let me do this for you. And then she ended up having her knee replaced. And I was like, let me help you. I can drive. No, I don't need that. I'm like, yes, you do. You can't drive. So I can do that because I know your husband's at the office. So like, let me go ahead and do that for you. She's like, it is so much harder on the other end.
it is.
It really is.
Yeah, and
now you understand.
And if you don't accept the help, like for me, I did not want to accept help, just like your friend, just it's challenging to do. But what I've discovered is like by not accepting the help, you're hurting the other person. If you want to be helpful in the situation, allow other people to help you because they want to. And that was a difficult part for me.
Yeah. And I finally had a friend of mine tell me that. She's like, I'm offering to do things for you because I care about you. And when you keep telling me no, it hurts my feelings. Like you don't want me involved in your life. And I'm like, oh, that's not at all. Like, so that was that other piece of like understanding. Like you said, like it really does hurt people when you try to help them and they're like, no, I got this. I got this.
Yeah, because it's like their help isn't good enough for you, and but from my perspective, it was like, I don't want to burden someone. Like that's one of my biggest fears, is to be a burden on someone.
Right. And that's where that connection and understanding and compassion for yourself and others, like being curious about, like, you keep asking me for help and I realize that I am saying no a lot. Please understand that that is me saying no because I am trying so hard to be independent and not be a burden. How are you receiving that? And, and they more often than not are, well, it kind of hurts my feelings that you don't want me to help you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And like, oh, just that one little conversation can change so much about a relationship. And even internally, your willingness to ask for help when you need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's super important to, just to humble yourself, ask for help because it's going to be better in the long run because people want to help you. And, just it'll work out better too, because otherwise trying to carry coffee on crutches is not fun.
No, it isn't. When I got out of the hospital, I had a neck brace. I had my hand was like in a like brace sling thing. I had like all of these wires and stuff all over my hand. So like I couldn't do anything. My mom, I had paralyzed my vocal cords, so I couldn't swallow things. I could only eat like applesauce and stuff, like mushy food. And so it was like all of this stuff. I couldn't wash my child's hair because I couldn't move my hand. And I had to have help from my parents while I was in that place of recovery. And it was so hard because all I wanted was for them to go home and get back to their lives because I felt like I was a burden. I wanted to get back to my life. And reality was I couldn't at that point. I had to take the time I needed to get to the place where I could do the things that I really wanted to be able to do. And then I had to learn how to pick and choose what was most important because I wasn't doing all of it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that goes back to that prioritization that we were talking about earlier and how important that is. That's a skill that you have to learn. But and sometimes you're forced to learn it. You're forced to, make those tough choices of what's the most important and go through that. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. I think most of us are, right? I mean, I don't think anybody is good at prioritization until they are faced with you either do this or all of it is going to blow up, right? Like you have to pick the things that are important or it's all just going to fall apart. And, that is a very humbling experience. And it's also really good for people to experience it because it provides it catalyzes that growth, right? It is the catalyst for growth. That humbling experience of not being able to do it all on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get to that point in your life where you're just adding on things and adding on things, and at some point you're gonna have to say, like, in order to add on this thing, what thing am I not going to do? What am I going to take away?
Right.
And start making those decisions.
Yeah. And the same thing goes inside the office too, right? Like I have this project and this project and this project, and I am doing all of these things. And my boss just asked me to take on another project. Well, then let's have a conversation about this because there is no way that I am going to do 4 projects well, right? I can do 3 projects well based on the current scope of these projects. But if you ask me to do this other one of these others have to go to somebody else. So let's talk about how we can make that work so that we are all happy and our clients are getting what they need and our team is getting what they need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that making those decisions are really important. Having that conversation, just like you just said, like being able to go and say, I can do 3, but I can't do 4. And a lot of people don't want to tell their boss that because they feel like they're going to get let go or replaced because they're not good enough. But a lot of times the boss doesn't realize how much work they
just has no idea.
They're just saying, "Oh, this is great. Hey, they can do that. They're doing a good job on these. They can do one more."
Yeah. Yeah, like, this person is such a fantastic worker. We'll just give her this other one, this other project. It'll be fine. Everything will be great because they're fantastic.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I'm not going to be fantastic at anything if I try to do all the things.
Right. Yeah.
Like, nobody can be. It's impossible to be great at everything you're doing. So it is much better to have that conversation and be realistic. And, sometimes you are going to meet with that pushback from your boss, right? Especially when they aren't aware of what really is happening. So, how do we have those conversations that are, real, respectful, and like, hey, I want to make sure I understand what your priorities are. Here's where my concerns are. I'm happy to do whichever 3 of these you think is most important. But adding on that 4th one, I'm not going to be, it's not going to happen well. And to me, I would rather do 3 things well than try and do 4 things and not do anything well. Would you rather me just get the 4 things done? Like, because sometimes that could be what the goal is, right? Like, we just need to get this done. So, you don't have to put 100% into all 4 things. Just get all 4 things done, right? Or it's, you're right. I see what you're saying there. Let's think about this and figure out what the priorities are and who maybe on the team could be well suited to do this other piece that seems like it's too much.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I try to do as a leader to kind of help the situation along the way, and I think other leaders probably should think about ways similar to this, is to regularly and routinely ask, your managers or individual contributors, whoever's reporting to you on a regular basis, like, am I overloading you with things? Is there things that I can take off your plate? Is there something that's too much? Or do you think would be better served by someone else? And,
right.
And make sure that they know that you're asking that out of, compassion and understanding, not out of, like, oh, you're not doing a good job.
Right. Right. So, like prefacing that with, I think you're doing an absolutely amazing job. I am concerned that I am leaning too heavily on you because I know what a great job you're doing. So is there a place where I have given you too much? And if there is, please tell me, because I want you to continue to be doing a great job, right? I want to set you up for success, not set you up for failure. And I think it is so important for leaders to have that understanding that what their goal really is to set their team up for success. And setting people up for success is giving them, I'm not saying don't push people out of their comfort zone a little bit. Please feel free. Like, that's how we grow. But also be open to a little bit of pushback on that and say, like for people to say, hey, wow, I've got a lot on my plate right now. Is there any chance somebody else could take this particular thing on? Or would you rather me focus on this and have somebody else take on something else that I'm doing? Like, let's figure this out together. And I think the more leaders are open to having the conversation together, right? To like have that mutual understanding and curiosity will allow their team to then be honest and share what's actually going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of ways you can go about, helping that conversation be mutual and having that's understanding. One of the things that I try to do is to do walking one-on-ones where we go outside and we're on a, side by side, versus having people come to your office is always so intimidating. It's always so, yeah. So like doing it somewhere where it's neutral, where everything is equal, it helps a lot. At least that's what I found.
Yeah. Well, and I love that walking one-on-ones. That's so great. I mean, it's like whenever you have a serious conversation with one of your kids, it's always better to have it in the car because then they don't have to look at you. And, then it doesn't feel like you're accusing them of something when you're asking something. It's the same kind of thing. Like, how do we as leaders communicate our desire to have the best outcomes, not necessarily the outcomes that we have pictured in our minds, but the best outcomes for our clients and for our team. And the only way as leaders that we can ensure best outcomes is by ensuring that everyone is participating in the conversation about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, having that full participation is so important. I do have another question about the book, though, before we get started, because I heard you talk about this once before in one of the other podcasts you were on, the cover of your book. It's definitely a painting. It looks like an amazing work of art. Can you talk about how that came to be and who created that for you?
Absolutely. It is an unbelievable painting. In fact, like I am looking at the original right now. It is on my wall. So my cousin is an amazing artist. And she had been out of New York and had gone to the New York studio school and has had shows all over New York, and then decided that she wanted to do plein air painting. So she and her husband spent a year traveling all over the US and she painted, and he, he had a remote job, so he could work wherever they were, right? And the idea was they were eventually going to find the place they wanted to live outside of New York, because they were done with the city. They wanted to figure something else out, but they wanted to see. And she wanted to paint in different environments, outdoors. And so during this time, I knew she was so crazy busy. So I had in my mind, like, oh, I would love Rachel to paint something for the cover of my book. And I'm like, I don't want to ask her. I don't want to ask her, because I didn't want her to feel like she had to say yes, right? Because I'm family. She's my cousin. And we were at Christmas. We were at her dad's house for Christmas. And I said to her, I was talking about the book, and it was in the editing process and everything. And I'm like, yeah, I haven't figured out the cover yet. And she's like, can I do some things and send them to you and see if they hit the mark? And I'm like, oh my God, yeah. Like, this is exactly what I wanted, and I didn't want to ask you. She's like, why didn't you ask me? And I'm like, because I know you have so much going on. Like, I mean, she had all these shows going, and she was like painting all over the place. I'm like, there's no way. So her name is Rachel Rickert, and she did the painting on the cover of my book. And, we were just talking about, ideas for it. And she came back with like 5 or 6 things. And this was like the second one. And I just fell in love. And then later I said, please let me buy the painting from you. Because I don't want anybody else to have my book cover painting. And she said, no, silly, I'm just sending it to you. And so she did, and my parents got it framed for me, and now it's up in my office. But she is absolutely phenomenal. She has some beautiful works. They ended up settling in Joshua Tree, California. And so now she has like amazing mountain and desert scenes and like just beautiful stuff. So I am so grateful and so lucky that I, one, have a cousin with such amazing talent, and 2, that she was willing to do this for me.
Awesome. And I will link her in the show notes too, rachelrickert.com, so people can go and look at her art as well. But Carrie, if you don't mind, go ahead.
Rachel Rickert Art.
rachelrickertart.com.
It's gotcha. Rachel Rickert Art. Yeah.
Yes. All right. And I will link that in the show notes too at geekleader.com. But also, if you don't mind, just tell the audience how they can connect with you online, learn more about your business and what you do, and pick up a copy of your book.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So you can get the book on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. It's Trauma is a Catalyst. My email is Carrie, Carrie, at nomasadvisors.com. I love getting emails, so if anybody has any questions or wants to talk about anything, please feel free to send me an email. I'm pretty responsive. My website is nomasadvisors.com, and then I have a speaker website, carrierickert.com.
Awesome. And I'll link those in the show notes too at geekleader.com. Carrie, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much, John. It's been great to be here with you.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.